This is Patrick Russell. I'm interviewing Bob Shelato for the first time. This interview is taking place at Sainte-Mere Eglise on June 4th, 2014. This interview is being conducted by the Making History Project for a project named War and Peace, Memories from World War II. Let's continue with the story you were telling me about writing your books. You were telling me earlier that you've written 3 books.
Yes, I did. This was about 20 years ago that I wrote the first book, From Wheat Fields to Battlefields, and the name deriving from the fact that I was brought up in the wheat fields of Indiana. I don't recall why I got the idea of writing a book, but I did, and didn't pay too much attention to it until a reporter heard about it and read it, and then it came out in the newspapers and very quickly sold about 1,000 copies. I soon lost interest in it and lay gathering dust for many years, and my grandchildren have now picked up the project of putting the book on Amazon, which they have done. Since then I have written a children's book called Fire Dauber, and then more recently I just finished a book called From Battlefields to Wheat Fields, the opposite of the title of the first one. First one meaning going from the wheat fields of Indiana into battles. The second meaning from coming out of battles and how a soldier copes with coming home and the conditions that they find at that moment.
And what motivated you to write these books?
I don't recall any motivation. I knew that I had had a tremendous amount of experiences, far exceeding the average person, and I guess if I had to have a motivation, it would be that I would like for people to experience some of the things that I experienced.
Well, tell us where you started first of all in the service. What branch?
Well, the government allowed me to graduate in 1943 in June of that month, and immediately then I was drafted into the service. Went to Fort Benjamin Harrison, a suburb of Indianapolis, was then 30 days later transferred to Camp Bowie, Texas, and at that point I underwent training as a combat engineer. An interesting point is that a band met the incoming train, and I thought it was a bit unusual, never found the reason until years later at an Army reunion. An individual told me the reason the band was there because we were being activated into a brand new unit. And whenever they activated a new unit, they brought the band out. And that solved the mystery of why the band was on the platform when I arrived in Camp Bowie in '43.
What were your service dates?
Pardon me?
What were your service dates? So you started the service in '43 and until when?
In '43, and then I was discharged in early December of '45. So I was in the service about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And I guess that's not too long compared to most service people.
And what type of things did you do in the service?
Well, it's interesting to note that when we arrived at Camp Bowie, being a new unit, they lined everyone up on the parade ground, and then the cadre, the top sergeant, made up of top sergeant and the supply sergeant and cooks and so forth, they stood in the background on this long line of troops, all raw recruits. And they went down the line and they said to this individual, "You're a truck driver." To the next individual, "You're a tool keeper," and so on until they got to me and they looked me in the eye and they said, "You're a weapons sergeant." This did not mean that I was immediately a sergeant, but I would gain the rank of a sergeant if I didn't fulfill my duties as they expected. And that's how I happened to become a weapons sergeant. My duties consisted of overall responsibility for each and every weapon that our company had, and also I was in charge of security. So when the work detail went out to clear a minefield or build a bridge or blow up a bridge, whatever the occasion might be, my job was to see that these boys were protected from the enemy forces.
And so you're saying that it was just the fate of, or the luck of the draw, how you became a...
Just the fate of luck. They pointed a finger and they said, you're a weapons sergeant. And then years later, I come to realize that what a blessing that was. Many individuals, most all individuals, are dedicated to a squad, a platoon, a company, a battalion. I was really not dedicated really to any of those groups. I was considered kind of a loner. They gave me a vehicle and they gave me a driver. And it was my responsibility to see that these weapons were kept clean and provide the security. Beyond that, I had very little supervision. And so this opened the door to many experiences a normal person wouldn't have. If in battle we saw something happening on another side of a hill, I'd say to the driver, let's go check it out and see what's going on. Not many people had the opportunity to do those things. So because of that, I had far more experiences than the average individual.
And you were part of the 3rd Army, correct?
Yes, I was under George S. Patton's in the 3rd Army.
And what type of weapons were you involved with as a sergeant?
I remember we had a Thompson submachine gun. We had, of course, everyone carried an M1 rifle, and then we had the carbine. We had a 50 caliber. The 50 caliber was usually mounted on top of a ring mount above the passenger seat of the cargo truck, upon which I was usually spent most of my time riding in transit, and various other types, 45 pistol, so on. An interesting thing was that as a weapons sergeant, I had to know every detail of each of these weapons. And part of my testing was that we would not just field strip, which means that large pieces come off of the weapons, but I had to be able to detail strip down to the nuts and bolts of each weapon, and no matter how small or how large, and blindfold them, throw them onto a GI blanket, mix them up, and then be able to put all these weapons back together blindfolded. And this was necessary because you may have darkened conditions when you had to do that. And so that was the extent of my knowledge, part of my knowledge.
That's pretty impressive. So how many weapons do you think that you had to be a master of?
Most of we had a 30 caliber air-cooled machine gun. We had a 30 caliber water-cooled machine gun, and then we had the 50 caliber. And those are basically the 3 units that I was involved with. They were the main backbone of our security around each and every job that we went on. We also had the bazookas. I saw very little action with the bazookas, but although we did during wartime come up with one time that we had to use that particular weapon.
You mentioned earlier that because of your position, you had a lot more experiences than perhaps other servicemen.
Yes.
Can you elaborate what type of other experiences you had?
Well, one of the most dramatic experiences that I had happened shortly after we landed on Utah Beach, and we put together a few broken bridges and so on, which is kind of routine and monotonous. But then one day we were assigned a job of cleaning a highway off with mines, and I happened to be in the rear of the work detail. And I heard a motor in back of me, and I turned, and there were 3 Jeeps. And in the center Jeep was General George S. Patton. I knew this even from a distance because I could see the stars on the bumper. He always had his stars printed on the bumper, and I knew that's who it was. And as I looked up, he motioned me forward, and I came to his Jeep. And he was interested in knowing how far we had been looking for mines. And then he asked a question, have you found any mines? And I was giving negative answers, no sir, no sir. And then he asked a question that jokingly I can then say to my friends that the famous General George S. Patton came to me for advice. And this is how that happened. I found it quite humorous. The third question that he asked, he said to me, "Soldier, what do you think about up above, beyond this point?" And to me, that was he was asking advice. So I jokingly say, this guy came to me for advice. And my answer was very short and sweet and simple. No, none, sir. I don't know. I have no idea. And with that, he had a swagger stick and he motioned forward, and all three Jeeps took off at top speed. He had a major for a machine gunner in his Jeep, and two other lesser officers in the Jeep in front and in the back, and they had 30 calibers, and the major in Patton's Jeep had a 50 caliber machine gun. But the interesting thing about that was that after he left and went over the road that was not clear of mines, the Jeeps jumped the highway, crossed the ditch, and sped up the backside of a long hill cow pasture. But up on top of the hill was an American observation post, and you could see puffs of smoke above that where an LS-5 was dodging bursts of artillery that the Germans were trying to knock this plane out of the air. And occasionally shell bursts were on top of the hill. And he stopped the backside of the hill with these three Jeeps. Three men from a distance we could watch and see. They bent over and they rushed up to the backside of the hill, flopped down on top of the hill where along with the American observer was. And he watched the front lines for a good 20 minutes. And then all three mounted Jeeps again, and zoom, 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 they were disappeared and were gone. And about 3 days later, there was a tremendous drive. American tanks come up that same road, and it was a big drive and quite a large advance. So Patton was looking for a weak spot, soft spot. He apparently found one, and that's where the war took another advance up that road that we were trying to clear of mines.
What day did you land on Utah Beach?
We didn't land on Utah Beach during the action. As you will recall in your history book, the Eisenhower's war strategy was to hold General George S. Patton and Third Army in England quite visible, and so the Germans would know that the Third Army was still there, therefore perhaps thinking that this was not the real invasion. But after the invasion, then we were released, and then this was in the month of August.
Were you involved in the action that led to the Falaise Gap?
Pardon me?
Were you involved in the action that led to the Battle of the Falaise Gap?
Which gap?
Falaise?
No, I'm not aware of that.
You're not aware of that
No.
one.
But,
Which direction did you head when you landed on Utah, if you remember?
well, it's kind of interesting landing on Utah Beach. We left England in LSTs, landing craft tanks, and all of our ships were full of engineering vehicles and equipment. And we lay offshore during the daytime, low tide, waiting for the high tide to appear, and so we could watch the beach. It was piled full of tremendous quantities of war materials, piled high, and it was a mess. And above all that were dirigible-like balloons anchored on the end of steel cables flying high. I don't know how many hundreds of feet, but they were up high. This was to keep the enemy aircraft from strafing low on the beach. And so it was just a matter, a scene of turmoil as far as supplies and war materials went. And then the tide came in after dark, sometime during the middle of the night. The tide reached high level, and we were sitting in the ships waiting, and we could hear the sound of a bulldozer outside building a road to us. Later they would have floating docks brought over from England. There were no docks. So the ship nosed onto the beach, bulldozers piled the sand up, created kind of a crude road out of sand. Then in the total darkness dropped the front of the ship down, and MPs were out on the beach waving batons for the vehicles to follow. And apparently we made a wrong turn because the batons ended. We saw no more MPs directing traffic. But we disregarded this, found a road coming off the beach, and on the highlands and the fields above, we stopped waiting for the rest to catch up, which they never did. We were alone, and the rest of them had gone the right way, and we'd made the wrong turn in the middle of all these war supplies. And daylight started to break. We were using little slitted glasses on the lens of the trucks, and we could only see 10, 15 yards ahead of us. It was so pitch dark, and so we had no idea where we were at. We didn't even know if it was the right road we took. But daylight did come, and we saw steam coming from the radiator, and I told Pete Callis, the driver, we cannot go much farther, Pete. The radiator or the truck will certainly freeze up because of the heat. And he said, here's a farmhouse. And he said, Bob, you go down and get a bucket of water, and I'll stand by the truck. I had a translation book that they'd given us, a small book, in our breast pocket. And as I'm going down the path to knock on the door, I open up my little translation book, but there's not much light. It's hard to see. And I pounded on the door, and as the person is coming to the door, I'm scrambling to find the right word. And the door opened, there's a little shriveled up lady, full of wrinkles, farm lady, and I gave her this word, thinking it was water, and she disappeared. But we could hear the cattle and the chickens in the background, and only separated by a partition. Most people at that point in time pretty much lived together with their animals. And she returned with a bucket with a dozen or two of eggs for the radiator for the truck. And this was a problem. And so finally I took the little lady by the hand, and together we walked up the path to the truck. And I pointed to the steam coming out of the radiator, and then she immediately knew what was wrong, and turned and ran down the path with the bucket, and she came back with a bucket of fresh water. And it was quite a surprise. We gave her a chocolate bar, and because of the way her eyes sparkled and lit up and the expression on her face, we know that this poor old farm lady had not experienced chocolate in many, many years under occupation.
That's a pretty amazing story. Did you have any other interactions with civilians through your tour?
No, not too many. I stayed clear of most of the civilians. We had very little to do with them, and some people were looters, would go in and loot homes and things for personal things they wanted. And I stayed away from this type of thing because I had a deep dread of booby traps. Germans are very expert at that. To give an example of a booby trap, the Germans vacated a large French barracks, several stories high, and we found ourselves being housed in a small room on the top floor. And my roommate, he said, Bob, we're going to have a scuttle of coal and take the scuttle bucket down and bring back some coal. Would you do that, please? So I said, sure. And I took off. And as I'm coming back up and down the hallway, one of the rooms burst open like a firecracker exploding inside of a tin can, and the wall literally came off of the room and was displaced. It was now tipped out on the far side of the hall and being propped up. And in the middle of all this smoke was my friend next door. And he was completely stunned, and we brought him back conscious, but he survived and was not hurt. And what had happened, the Germans, before we moved in, had booby-trapped the coal bin. And they used egg coal, and it looked exactly like coal. And you could not tell the difference between a piece of TNT and the coal. And the fellow in the room ahead of us, he'd gotten his fire started earlier, and that's why his room exploded first.
An exploding room. That's an interesting booby trap. Did you have to do any work that would be disabling booby traps, or you only had to deal with your weapons?
No, mines, we were heavy in that. We cleared minefields, and as a matter of fact, we cleared all the minefields around Bastogne, and the way we had to do that, these poor GIs, the Air Force guys, many of them were dead. They're frozen in their holes, and so we had the job of pulling these guys out. And there was a specific way you had to do that, and if you didn't, you could get yourself blown up. The Germans, as I mentioned earlier, were very great and clever on booby traps, so they would booby trap a body that's in a foxhole, and they do that by putting a wire from that body down deeper into a large piece of explosive, and if you went in there to pull the body out, you'd get yourself blown up. So, possibility of it. Not always, but possibility. So we always had a 50-foot rope tied around the body, and then we'd go out and lay in the probe position, tip our steel helmet down, and then we'd 2 or 3 guys would start pulling on the rope, and many times the bodies had to be brought out in pieces that way. So that was kind of a messy thing.
Well, that leads to my next topic. Some say that war is hell.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Well, it certainly is.
Can you tell me more?
I treat each dead body like any inanimate object. It would no different than a stone, a fallen tree, log, or whatever. After a while, you don't get involved in this. You can't get involved in it. You put it all behind you.
So it numbs you.
It does, yeah. You put it all behind you, and that way you go along with a clear mind and be able to do your job. Everything has to be put behind you. What happened yesterday is forgotten.
And how did you develop that type of mindset? Is that something that they trained you to do, or something you came up with yourself?
My first experience with that would be we were given the job of keeping. Well, first of all, when the Battle of the Balls broke out, of course, Patton was the head of the rest of the armies, and apparently had hindsight and knew that this was going, or foresight knew that this was going to happen. And at least he suspected it was, so he had us prepared to go into the Battle of Bulge, before any of the other armies even were aware of this. So when we moved up to where the action was taking place, as a matter of fact, it was bitter cold, and that first night on the battlefield, we were given a bowling alley to sleep on. So we slept in the bowling alley. And the next morning, we all went to this meeting, and they said that each individual is assigned these roads, and there was 2 or 3 roads coming out of this town, as I recall, and any group that was assigned a road, they were assigned it with the orders that nobody surrendered nobody retreated, that this was your position and you would stay there. And no German would come farther than this point. So with that, we strung up TNT, I forgot the name of the cable, but anyway, we wired all the trees alongside the road. So if a German tank come that direction, we would turn the galvanator and all the trees would jump off the stump, crisscross, and that would be our roadblock. And the officer in charge was Captain Cisna, and he was a very eager guy and very aggressive. And he said, well, boys, we'll move on up ahead, and we'll blow up a bridge in this little town of Billstorp. And at night, we moved up to blow the bridge up. And in the meantime, German paratroopers came in and dug themselves in alongside the road and created an ambush. And it just so happened I was behind in the third squad, and the first and the second squad were completely annihilated, either that or became casualties in the ambush. And so we were able to retreat and go back and set up a roadblock in a defensive position. So I had some experience, to answer your question. I had a little experience for what happened that night. So I was on edge, and I knew the enemy at that point in the war would use real bullets. And so I was then unaware and on alert. And this started to develop an instinct for danger. And so then it was only a few days later, we were given an assignment for our truck to go back and pick up a load of explosives from an Army depot. And in this truck, the cargo truck that we had, were numerous miscellaneous items, like Bangalore torpedoes, which you use to blow barbed wire, and a case or two or three of M1 30 caliber shells and bullets, and 50 caliber, 45 caliber, and so forth. This miscellaneous stuff. It really didn't fit. We got into the and the depot is nothing but a field inside of a woods. They've just moved this stuff up and put truckloads of munitions. You can walk in and pick up anything you want. So we got there, but the guy in charge came over, and he said, no, and we had to have a lot of TNT, and they come in rectangular boxes. They packaged real nice and neat. And so he said, we'll have trouble with the irregularity of all this mess in here that you guys got in that truck. He said, clean that thing out, and we'll put all these nice even boxes in there, and then we'll throw that stuff up on top. And but then again, instinct told me that that was not the thing to do. And so instead of that, we piled the TNT on top. That saved my life. And the reason it saved my life is because you could not explode TNT with a bullet. So if you're in another ambush, you're not going to get blown up because it won't. You could set TNT on a fence post, shoot at it all day. It won't blow up. You have to have a detonator to make it explode. But the detonators are now on the bottom. The TNT is on top. So this is safety. They had a hard time understanding that depot. But being through an ambush, I'm leery. And so I'm on the lookout for problems. And sure enough, we get into Wall, Luxembourg. They're heading back to Wiltz, and a Stuka, I think it must have been a Stuka. I thought first it was another German fighter plane, but I'm convinced it had to be a Stuka, and because they are dive bombers. And this dive bomber, Stuka, came straight down, and because we have a top on the truck, so I'm not able to see visibility. Visibility is very poor. And so the Stuka came straight down, and now I hear the guns firing up there. And I'm now on alert that something's going on, and I think it's an ambush again, but coming from the fields at 1 o'clock. but it's not coming from the fields. It's
Where were you
hot.
sitting?
Pardon me?
Where were you sitting in the truck?
I'm sitting beside the driver.
Okay.
In the on the passenger seat. Earlier we took the top down because we saw suspicious activity in the air overhead, and I'll explain what that was. When Patton issued the prayer that that he hopes that the skies will clear so that we can eliminate our enemy, the skies did that, and they cleared. And overhead on that particular day, the sun was literally blocked out by American bombers. And there were thousands of planes in the air, all headed into Germany for bombing runs. And but below that mess of planes was this one plane. And we were very suspicious of that plane. I pointed this out to the driver, and he stopped. I said, "Pete, look that thing over." And he said, "I don't know." He said, I can't understand why it's circling and not going with the rest of them. And he said, "I don't understand why they don't come down and shoot him if he's an enemy, so apparently he's not an enemy." And we debated it, and we stopped, watched, and we got cold. We'd taken the top off where we could get to the machine gun, but we got cold. And now we think that, well, there's no more fear, no more danger, because this has been, time has elapsed. But what we didn't know was this guy was still hanging around, and he knew where we were at and was waiting for us to come out. So finally we did come out of town, and we started up a long hill, and this is where we heard the firing. And I'm thinking it's an ambush, and then my eye catches the sight of bullet holes coming in the hood of the truck. This guy coming straight down, and it's like a machine, like a sewing machine. And that's all I need. And I literally burst the door open and rolled onto the highway, and the truck continues on. And then when I come out of the snowdrift, I look up and I see this plane, and I actually saw the pilot. The plane had made it, after he made the nosedive, he's now turned and coming up at a big steep angle and waiting to get altitude as he straightened out and take off. But I saw the pilot sitting there, and which I thought was quite unusual. But I look up and see the truck up there, and I don't see Pete, the driver. And so I thought, well, geez, he must be in the truck. So I ran up, and sure enough, he can't get out of the truck because his gear shift, clutch, and all that's in the way. I was free as a passenger. Nothing obstructed me from breaking out. So I did that, broke out. And but now the idea is to get him out of there because this thing is starting to blaze. Must have a dozen fires. So then I'm able to work himself out with his help. He's still alive. He'd been hit 5 times. And so I dragged him over into a little patch of woods and over the backside of a hill. And then back then, the only thing we had was sulfurs. We had no penicillin. So I unload all my supply of sulfur in these holes, these bullet holes for wounds. And but he still needs some more help and more medicine. And so I look up and I assess my chance of getting the first aid kit behind the driver's seat. Assess that, and the fires are still on top. And I thought, well, it's safe to do that.
And you're talking about a truck with TNT.
It's sitting out there burning.
With TNT
Truck's
inside.
Burning. Yeah, it's been machine gunned. It's dead. And so I dashed across and with one motion swept up the first aid kit behind the driver's seat. And lo and behold, a machine gun opens up fire. And I'm astounded, thinking that that guy had circled around and was now going to machine gun me. This is what I thought. It wasn't. And the heat was so intense on the passenger side, right, and that's where the 50 caliber machine gun is at. And earlier, when we had the top off, we had jacked a shell in there, ready to shoot at that guy. And since he had never showed up, and we got cold, we put the top back on. And but the flames were coming up that side of the truck, and it got hot enough that 50 caliber machine gun on its own, which was already cocked and ready to go, started firing. And I thought it was that plane. And then I saw that it was, the bullets were going up that way. Every fifth round was a tracer. You could see where it was shooting. And way up on the other end of the hill was this Jeep. He coming over the hill in direct line of fire, but he sees the tracers. And he swerves to the right over the ditch on my side of the road and come barreling down through the open fields. And so I flagged him down, and we got him and the driver over on the back side of the hill, and this thing blew up. And then we took Pete to the hospital, but he was hit too bad, and he died about 5 days later. So I think that was the point that you were asking me about what was that?
War being hell.
Huh?
War being hell.
Yeah, yeah. So that's all part of it. Mm-hmm.
And how long had you been working with Pete? Up to that time?
Yeah, from the day one.
Day one.
Yeah, and he was my truck driver when I had the cargo truck, and then we had a fellow named Ralph Dash, and when we had a lesser type job, the vehicle would be a 3/4 ton weapons carrier, or it would be a Jeep. So I had more than one or two drivers there occasionally.
So in that same moment, that event that you just described, did you experience madness?
No.
No?
No.
Terror?
Well, yeah, you'd be completely upset, yes. But again, well, it was on my mind pretty much. But then another incident happened that swept that away, and after that I was okay. And we were sleeping in a little farmhouse. I'm not sure if it was a farmhouse, but it was a building. It was a house. Normally in Europe they don't have their farmhouses out in the country, so it was an individual home. And it had been converted into an artillery spotting, the artillery directing command post. And our sleeping quarters, my friend and I were sleeping up above on the top floor. Down below they were directing fire for artillery that was back in the background, back a mile or two behind us. But all the communications on where to aim the guns was coming into this spot, and we were sleeping over the top of it. And I came in one day from work, and it was in the afternoon. I felt tired, and I thought, well, I'll take a nap. Nothing going on. Heavy snow outside. And so I'm sound asleep up above, middle of the afternoon. One of the guys that's running the artillery, the coordinates, they're coordinating the fire. And one of the guys, it started to get dark, and he wanted to fill a Coleman lantern, and he filled white gas in a steel helmet. And they took the little top off the Coleman lantern. He didn't know much. He's trying to pour out of a steel helmet, pour white gas into a little hole. The whole room come up and exploded. And as it's catching fire, he throws the steel helmet. And now the fire is over everything. So everybody runs all which directions to vacate it except my friend. And he ran up the stairs. And he shouted to me, "Bob, building's on fire." And he literally dove out the window, second floor window.
In the middle of winter.
In the middle of winter.
To get out of a burning building.
To get out of the burning building. And my reaction from sound sleep was quick enough that I almost landed on top of him. So that incident then...
You had your uniform on?
Huh?
You had your uniform on?
Well, yeah. And that incident just kind of broke everything, and I was all set to go, and shook me right out of any thoughts about what had happened the previous couple of days, and so that's the way it was.
Well, that actually is a natural segue to my next question, which is peace. We first talked about war being hell.
Peace.
Now, peace. In this incident, did you experience times of peace during war?
Do what?
Did you experience times of peace during war?
Oh, yes. War was one of these things. As a matter of fact, it's just a daily job. And nothing's exciting. And your excitement comes just occasionally when these unusual things happen in a time frame of I was in service year and a half, overseas year and a half. In the United States 1 year and year and a half over there. So in the span of 18 months, you've got the high points. And the rest of the time is normal. Everything is normal.
So things come in bursts.
Yes, they do. And they come at unknown times. You never know when this is going to happen. You could walk into a problem any day, any time. So you always had to be on edge. You had to be very, very cautious mentally. You don't express that. Nobody talks about it. But you're alert.
And did that impact you after you left the service? That type of being on edge?
No, the only thing that I ever experienced, and I could probably experience a little bit of that today, 70 years later, are shoe mines. And shoe mines are made up of plastic, explosive, and they're built to blow a person's foot off. And the Germans literally scattered millions and millions of those things around. And a lot of people lost legs because of that. And so you're always cautious when you step someplace. And I don't know how to explain it, but that type of feeling would go on for years and years and years, that you're always cognizant of where you're putting your feet.
And to this day?
Huh?
To this day?
Not too much now. Not too much. It could be. My mind would go back to that. Yeah.
Did you ever experience any acts of kindness during the war? Oh, certainly your friend helped you by getting you out of the building in time. But did you ever experience any other types of kindness during war?
No, it's just like working at a factory or anyplace else. It's just average. Everything is average when you go day to day, except those high points, and they're not average. They're situations where you're really going full blast, but the rest of the time pretty routine. Everything is pretty routine. You're just there to do your job, and no matter what happens, it's pretty much quickly. You're not talking about sitting around talking about it. It could be very dramatic. It's still nobody's sitting around talking about it. It's just a daily job. You do what you're told to do.
In your third book, From the Battlefields to the Wheat Fields, you said that one of the purposes was to explain how you adapted and came back.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, you're gone, like I was gone 2.5 years. You don't know how to dress. Dress styles have changed in 2.5 years. And so I'm told, I'm trying to seek advice, what do I wear, what do I buy? And you're looking, watching everybody to see what they're wearing. So I made a trip to Indianapolis, 80 miles away, to buy three new suits. And they were called zoot suits. And I was advised that's what you should be wearing when you go out on a date. Well, the cuffs are so small you can't put them on without taking your shoes off. I never wore them. And that's just a minor problem, but it's a lot of those little things that you have to settle into that are different than when you left.
What about the regimented lifestyle of the Army?
Yeah, I never cared for that.
And that didn't leave an impact on you?
I was kind of, I never cared for it, and they wanted me to re-enlist and all that, and that was in the back of my mind. It's too regimented. And when I got home, my father wanted to be an electrician, and he was an electrician, my construction electricians, and my two brothers were electricians, and my brother-in-law was an electrician. We had 4 electricians, and I'm to be an electrician. And I did become an electrician, or wanted to. And the first day of the job, they told me that, well, go see the shop foreman, and this is a General Electric factory that's being built. The only thing there is a concrete floor and walls and roof. No machines, no nothing. And so I'm looking for the shop steward, who turns out to have an office on the far end of the factory. But on my transit, I see a light bulb burned out. And I searched and found a stepladder. And as I'm taking the light bulb out of the receptacle, I feel something tugging on my pants cuff. And so I look down, this guy says, "Come down here, Saul." He said, "Are you the guy that they're sending over to see me?" He said, "I'm the shop steward." I said, "Yes, I was over, look, I'm on the way to see you." And he said, "Why are you up there?" And I said, "I'm doing my duty." I said, "I see the opportunity to get off on the right foot, and I'm changing this light bulb." No, no, no. He said, "You are not a journeyman. You're a grunt, and this is a beginner electrician. You're not the journeyman, the full electrician." He said, "We have a guy that can do that. That's not your job." And then a few days later, they had an experienced electrician screw the light bulb in. And at that moment, I realized now, see, I'm in the Union, and I realized now I'm in a regimented environment again. And that's really turned me off. And then a few days later, the carpenters moved a tool crib from the wall along with the rest of the craftsmen, and they moved a tool crib to the center of this big space. And everybody, the other crafts, complained because they had to walk around it. It is an acre of space, but they complained and they went on strike, and I'm back home. And 2 weeks later, the strike ends, and we're unloading a roll of cable, huge, massive cable, like 3 inches diameter, 6-foot high spools. You can only move them with a jimmy bar. And the shop steward of the millwrights come by, and they said, "What are you guys doing?" "Well, we're taking this roll of cable off." And "You can't do that. That's millwright shop." "No, we own the cable. That's our cable." And there's another argument. 2 weeks later, I'm back home again. And
on strike.
Strike. But then again, you have to remember that the wartime had drained all the products off the market, and people did not have stoves and refrigerators and things like that, and the cars had worn out, and there was everybody was hungry for consumer goods. The unions were in the driver's seat, and there was like fires, union fires all over the place, with strikes all over the country. So this was not unusual happening, but it was not my environment.
So
I went off to Indiana University and completely changed the lifestyle.
And what did you pursue?
Marketing.
So the Army did have an impact. In other words, it changed you from being regimented to pursuing something more free-flowing.
Right. Well, I had the job in the Army, as you recall, I was a free floater. I was not attached to anybody. I had very little supervision, and so I wasn't. People would like for me to have supervision, but I didn't want the supervision. If you know,
you were a rebel with a cause.
Yes, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes. Okay. And was there any other, how should we say, impact in terms of what you were reflecting in your book on your life, from adjusting from the battlefields to the wheat fields?
I don't think so. I'd always wanted to be in business on my own, and I succeeded in doing that. And although I did work for Ralston Purina Company for 18 years, but then opened up my own business. And I had my own business before I worked for them. I was not successful in the first business that I opened up. I was at Messina, New York. Eisenhower signed the St. Lawrence Seaway Bill, and this was an agricultural feed store that I had opened up, and it wiped out my market, and it flooded when they built the 80-foot high dams. It flooded and they created a lake 5 miles wide, about 30 miles long, wiped out most of my customers. So that was not a success. Ralston Purina Company then picked me up because I had knowledge and background of a feed store. And they wanted me then to come into marketing, and marketing is what I studied to do. So I pursued the marketing course with Ralston Purina, and was very successful doing that. You know.
Good. And you obtained your degree through the GI Bill?
Pardon me?
You obtained your degree through the GI
I
Bill?
did, yeah. I didn't get a degree. I went 2 years.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I had lost so much time being in service and trying to be an electrician and all that, that I just couldn't go another 2 years. I wanted to get out and get going, get something started.
Yeah.
And so I didn't finish. But I don't think that was any hindrance to me back then. Might be today, but didn't hinder me then.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about that I haven't asked you about?
Well, we went on, during the war years, we went on to accomplish something that I've always felt we never got the blessing from the Army for doing the job that we did. I held that as a little resentment towards the Army. We succeeded in, as I might have mentioned to you earlier, we succeeded in making an assault boat crossing across the Rhine River, and the history books today look upon that event and they say that that's the first time in the history of warfare that any foreign element ever successfully crossed the St. Lawrence River under assault conditions. And I just thought that that deserved a little recognition. And so today I'm working on that.
And what are you trying to do?
I'm trying to get a monument built at Oppenheim, Germany, dedicated to the 249th Combat Engineer Battalion and Patton's Third Army for accomplishing that had never been done in all the history of warfare. And I just thought that that should be recognized. And so that's a little pet project on the side that I'm working on, and hopefully we'll get that job done while we're here in France. I have the Patton Foundation that is trying to get a group of Germans together so that I can persuade them to build a tourist monument, to build tourist business. And on the monument, it would explain that this is an important factor of history. And that would be good for their business and good from my standpoint.
Well, it sounds like a worthy cause, and
I believe it is.
I wish you all the luck with that.
Thank you.
And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview you, and I thank you for your service.
I had more interesting experiences after the war ended.
Well, certainly you had a whole bunch of them during as well.
Yeah, I just briefly mentioned a little bit after the war. Tremendous experiences. They had no need for a weapons sergeant because there was nobody to shoot at. The war had ended. Bullets are no longer flying. And so they changed my job description, not my rank. They changed my job description from weapons sergeant to construction foreman. And I was no more a construction foreman than you and I. I knew nothing about it. And but that was the title they gave me. They had to do that apparently. And now I'm standing around with nothing to do, and every once in a while an important job comes along and they find me and they say, you do it. And one of those jobs was that we were building a 20,000 person displaced person center. And the captain called me in. He said, we don't have any glass for the windows. And he said, it's very important we get glass. And we're sitting near Czechoslovakia, and I want you to go to Czechoslovakia and you obtain glass for the center. It's under Russian occupation. And but again, we're in peacetime. So my driver, and he said, fill your vehicle up with gas and take extra cans and don't go until you run out of gas. So I had to go interview all these factories in Czechoslovakia that produce glass, convincing them to turn some of it over to us. And we finally did get one factory that would chip the glass. I thought that was interesting.
A little from hot war to cold war.
Yeah. And then another incident, they have to shut down the German war machine. And how do you shut down a war machine? I found it most interesting. They divided Germany into little squares. And I received one of those squares. And I received a form, a bunch of paperwork, red tape, and I was to interview anybody that was producing anything, whether it's shoestrings or pencils. No matter what's being manufactured, they had to report it. So I arrived in the town where there's two shoe factories. The one guy is very irate. He's not going to reveal his information because I'm going next door. And he doesn't want the next door
competitor
to know. And so I told the interpreter, I said, will you tell this gentleman that this is perfectly all right to me, and it really doesn't make a difference to me, and I'm coming back in 2 weeks. And if this material is not filled out, he'll never make another pair of shoes, ever. So with that, he said, sit down in that chair, which I did. He said, take your shoe off. I did. And he measured my foot. He said, when you come back, he said, I'm going to have something for you. And when I got back, he had the most beautiful pair of combat boots. They were gorgeous. And there was not a nail in those boots. There was not a stitch in those boots. They were all held together with peg nails, wooden peg nails. Beautiful pair of boots. And so I just thought that was interesting. The other point I found interesting was that an individual told me when I come out of a place of business, go look over the hill. There was something important went on there during the war. We went over that way. It's surrounded by MPs, huge concrete facing on the side of a hill. The only place you can get in behind that wall is over on the end. You come in behind it. And inside is a factory that used to make rocket parts. The MPs wouldn't let me get anywhere near
it. The V2? The V2 rockets?
Yeah, I guess so. And they were packaging all this material up, labeling it to be shipped to the United States. And that's I thought, the birthplace of the United States space program. And I thought that was interesting.
Very interesting.
And I was not able to get in there on the first trip. It took 2 trips to get in, and the first time, the officer in charge of me, he said, why wasn't this filled out on that place that you found? I said, they threatened to shoot me. And it's highly secure with MPs. And they sent word up to Patton's headquarters somewhere, and some officer way up top sent down a piece of paper, which I gave 2 weeks later to the MPs, and they admitted me in. It's top secret, you know. And I just thought that was kind of interesting too.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your stories today. It's been a pleasure. And I wish you all the best and enjoy the rest of the week and your parade. And all that goes with it for the remaining of the 70th anniversary. All right.
And it's been interesting visiting with you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.